It's Pete Nova from the Face Off Sports Network. Today I am back with my Week 3 wide receiver start sits. The first wide receiver I'd like to get into as a start is going to be Rashid Shaheed of the New Orleans Saints. Shaheed is averaging 84.5 yards per game. That's on 4.5 targets and 3.5 receptions. He also has a touchdown in each game that he has played so far this season. This is an explosive player. He's averaging 24.1 yards per reception. I don't expect him to keep up that absurd number, but he will continue to provide explosive plays for the Saints this season. This is a player that, since 2023 leads the NFL in receptions that travel 50 plus air yards. He has 7 so far, and we just started the season. He squares off against the Philadelphia Eagles, who are second in terms of fantasy points allowed for defenses to the wide receiver position at 41.8. And this is a defense that's susceptible to giving up the big play. The Eagles gave up big plays to Jayden Reed in week 1 and Darnell Mooney in week 2. So I am very much rostering and firing up Shaheed in my starting lineups if I have him. He's a very strong flex play and might even find himself, if he continues at this pace, to be a potential wide receiver 2 in fantasy this year, and someone that you should feel confident in starting at the wide receiver 2 on your team and in your lineup. Right now, he's still a flex play, but I love rostering him and starting him for week 3. I think he's got a really good matchup. Going into my first sit of the week, it's going to be Christian Kirk for week 3 of the Jacksonville Jaguars. Over the first 2 weeks, he is wide receiver 97. It's been a really tough start for Christian Kirk. He was injured in camp, and maybe it's due to the injury. I did watch the tape, and I just don't really feel like the team's utilizing him correctly. He's averaging 2.45 fantasy points per game, and his yards per route run is 0.54, which ranks 82 out of 87 in the NFL for wide receivers with a minimum of 5 targets this season. That's pretty bad. He faces a Buffalo Bills defense who surprisingly has been really stout against opposing wide receivers in fantasy. They're ranked 5th best in terms of defenses against the wide receiver position, just averaging 5.2 points allowed per game. I do think Christian Kirk will bounce back this season, but I just don't think it's going to be in the cards for him week 3. My second start of the week is going to be DJ Moore of the Chicago Bears. DJ Moore is wide receiver 36 on the season. He was one of my sits in week 1. He's played 2 really tough matchups against L'Jarius Sneed and Derek Stingley the first 2 weeks of the year. He has 10 points in week 1 and 11.3 points in week 2, but they do get a much softer matchup in the Indianapolis Colts. The Colts are the 5th worst fantasy team against wide receivers. They're averaging 33 points per game given up to the position. This is a game that's going to be played indoors, so I think that benefits. They won't have to worry about weather. We're still unsure if Keenan Allen is going to play. I believe he's been limited during this week, and he didn't play last week. And, Rome Odunze did not really have a great game. It was pretty much Keenan Allen that they relied on the whole time. I expect him to get better. They've got some good matchups coming up, and he's somebody I want to keep in my lineup. Caleb Williams should be more comfortable. They faced some decent pass rushes the first 2 weeks of the year, and the Colts don't have that kind of defense. So I would most certainly feel comfortable starting DJ Moore, and he's one of my favorite starts on the week. My second sit of the week is going to be Jayden Reed of the Packers. He squares off against the Titans. This is, of course, assuming Jordan Love does not play. If Jordan Love does play, I'm comfortable starting him. But he's wide receiver 4 on the year. So this kind of sounds, a little blasphemous to say, go ahead and sit him. But keep in mind, he is kind of inflated with his fantasy points. He had 33.1 1 week 1, and then we saw what happened to him in week 2. He only had 6.6 against a Colts defense who we just talked about is not very good to the wide receiver position. They give up a lot of points, and Jayden Reed still couldn't make hay in week 2, only having 6.6 points. I expect that trend to continue. He plays the Titans, who are third best in terms of points surrendered at just 14.6 to wide receivers per game. And, I don't really want anything to do with these wide receivers until Jordan Love comes back. But if Jordan Love is starting this week, he did log a limited practice today, which is Wednesday. So if Love does play, I'm comfortable starting Jayden Reed. But until that happens, I don't really feel good about getting him in my lineup. And I would look to pivot to other players like this next player, who is my third start of the week, which would be Khalil Shakir. Khalil Shakir is wide receiver 30 on the year, 13.2 points for fantasy week 1, 10.6 points in week 2. They started to get in rhythm against the Miami Dolphins week 2. Josh Allen and Khalil Shakir, he's been his favorite wide receiver target in the first 2 weeks of the season. Shakir was targeted 5 times. He caught all 5 passes for 54 yards in week 2. And, if it wasn't for a blowout, obviously Tua Tagovailoa got hurt, and they, came out of the second half and threw a pick 6, and the Bills just kind of started running away with the game. I do believe Khalil Shakir would have had an even better fantasy output on the week, but he is still a nice flex play. He's going up against the Jacksonville Jaguars defense, who is 8th worst in fantasy points allowed to the wide receiver position. They're giving up 30.5 points per game. So I think he is a very solid play. I believe this will be a closer game than last week for this Bills team, and I do think the chemistry continues to grow with Josh Allen. And my last sit of the week is going to be Jaylen Waddle taking on the Seahawks. Waddle is wide receiver 28 on the year. Tua Tagovailoa just placed on IR. We're just really not sure when he's going to come back. But right now it's Skylar Thompson at the quarterback position. And I just really don't want to start Jaylen Waddle until I see him and Skylar Thompson can be successful together on the field. I feel different about Tyreek Hill. I know they can manufacture touches, and Tyreek Hill can also take the ball and go 80 yards for a touchdown. Jaylen Waddle has that kind of speed as well, but he's not the same player as Tyreek Hill, and I do think this affects him more, though you did pay a much higher cost for Tyreek Hill. They take on the Seattle Seahawks, who are 4th best in points allowed to the wide receiver position, just 14.6 per game. And so I'm not really loving this matchup in Seattle for a quarterback like Skylar Thompson. The Seattle defense is looking a lot better this season with McDonald at the helm, and maybe they, pivot to Tyler Huntley, who I actually think is probably the better quarterback over Skylar Thompson. But until that happens, I don't really feel great starting Jaylen Waddle, and so he's going to be one of my sits on the week. But that's going to do it for me, guys. If you guys do have questions about anybody that was talked about in this video or other start-sit questions, feel free to drop them in the video below in the comments, and like the video as well. And we'll see you next time.